That was way too nice an introduction. Thanks, Mike. That's totally oversold me. But one of the things that greatly helped my presentation was the fact that you would think that Armando and I worked very closely together, coordinating what we were about to say today, because guess what my first slide is? All right, the integration hairball. Now, I could spend the next 45 minutes or 40 minutes up to the break never leaving this slide, because this is, in effect, why we're here. And as Mike just brought up, the really interesting thing is this hairball, which has grown up, that everybody kind of chuckles at when they see it, you're not just chuckling because of the fact that Armando actually mentioned the word hairball in his presentation, but it's the fact that this is so familiar to all of us. This is what we are all dealing with. And why does it happen? It happens because your clients, your customers, your business, your citizens, whoever you work with, need whatever they want yesterday and don't give you time to architect things properly, right? And yet here we are, and this topic of the subject today, I couldn't agree with more, is that enterprise architecture, because of all that, is now more important than ever at getting ahead of the ball. And so what I'm going to talk about here is kind of bring a few of these things together. Look at this for a second. This is a 1999 picture that Best Buy, a company we're all pretty familiar with, I'm sure, created for their Y2K initiative, okay? So they went through the very difficult challenge of going through and documenting what are all our systems and how do they connect to each other. Now, how many people have actually done that? That's pretty good. That's pretty good, because obviously this was valid for about 5 minutes, right? And then immediately it's out of date. Plus, let's look at what's happening right now. Right now, this picture is getting more complex at a faster rate than it ever has before. And Armando talked about a lot of these issues, right? Cloud, software as a service, is disintegrating our world at a faster rate than ever before. Software, service-oriented architecture, where we're supposed to provide this logical, abstract view on top of this hairball. Between 2001 and 2006, I went to trade shows where people talked about the beauties of software, service-oriented architecture, SOA, and they talked about how this was going to solve this integration problem, this hairball problem. And I'd go up to the speaker afterwards, or I'd go up and talk to people afterwards, and I'd say, well, wait a second, what about the underlying data problem? How are you fixing that? They'd say, oh, no, that problem goes away because we create this business services abstraction layer, and that makes that problem go away. I said, really? Oh, okay. Anyway, now you go to a conference between 2006 and 2011, what are people talking about? They're talking about data, right? They're talking about all that did was push the problem down to a different group of people. It's now getting hard-coded into Java programs, C# programs, and so forth, and making the problem worse, not making the problem better. Because yes, loose coupling and tight cohesion is wonderful. We love that. Who does that help? That helps the service consumers. They love it. They now have reusable, consumable services that they can use. That's wonderful. Who did that problem make things worse for? The people producing those services. The iceberg below the water level, right? That problem is now worse because all that data integration logic got pushed down into hand code. And in effect, now the problem's worse than the point-to-point problem we had before. Because now we don't know what's talking to what anymore. Everything's loosely coupled. If I make a change to a business system, what other things does it affect? I don't know. So I need something to help me de-abstract my abstraction. At the same time, I want to benefit from my, anyway, as you can see, I could spend the whole day just talking about this slide. How does this happen? Well, this, thanks to Office 2010, this slide I learned this morning doesn't quite grow the way that it's supposed to. But this is how it happens. It happens because projects come up and teams get put together, and let me go back once again, okay. We are organized around the boxes in this picture, right? Who's looking after the lines between the boxes? No one, right? That's the problem. That was our first book. Integration Competency Centers and a methodology and how to implement them and so forth. In other words, centers of excellence, focusing on the lines between the boxes and how important that is. We've forgotten that book, however, to talk about how do I actually run one, and why should I, and what are these chargeback models and financial considerations that Armando was talking about that justify this, and so forth. So we answered that in this lean integration book that got a few copies, by the way, out there on the Informatica desk. As you'll mention, as you'll see, I'm not going to be talking about Informatica technology really much at all. The book itself never mentions Informatica. It's a vendor-neutral book. So, and we have a couple copies. If you're interested, come up, give us your card, and we only have a couple copies, but if you have a few good questions, whoever kind of first come, first serve, and most interested, we'll get a copy anyway. So, we're organized around the boxes, not the lines between the boxes. So when a project is put together, you know, they use the skills of the team that works on that project, right? So they use stored procedures. They use whatever tools they have in their mix. And at one time, in the 2000s, there were 500 middleware companies out there. So you can imagine, throughout the government, I can imagine how many different things that you have. So as Armando talked about, this builds in cost, this cheapness, this using what I have in front of me, builds in this complexity that you'll pay for later. So, what the rest of my time is talking about how do I deal with that? I'm now behind the curve, how do I get ahead of the curve? That's what lean integration is kind of all about. So, Informatica, if you are familiar with us, we used to be known for ETL for data warehousing, extract, transformation, and load for loading data warehouses. We've grown a lot more than that. We do everything from cloud integration to retirement and conversion and consolidation of systems to master data management. We bought Cyperion last year, to identity resolution, resolving identities down to single people, data quality, et cetera. You see here, that's the end of my Informatica commercial. What I'm going to talk about, though, is if you don't get the people and the process problem of this correct, it doesn't matter what technology you choose. You can make a mess, in effect, with anybody's technology if you approach it in a haphazard kind of way, obviously. So, I'm filled with a room full of people who all, in effect, are brought here by kind of one unique skill that you've developed, and that is, over your career, you've been chosen, in effect, as people who, in that hairball, are able to see the patterns, the common patterns that you end up redoing over and over again. In other words, the root cause of this hairball, as I mentioned before, is that people think of doing things in terms of custom point solutions, or as we call them, unique works of art. They're really proud of the little integration point-to-point thing that they've built. And it took a lot of skill to build it. I don't mean to demean that. But the fact is, and what you've seen, as I grow the slide, notice these words now in the middle have changed, is that you rethink how technology can guide people down successful patterns. The fact is, if you squint a little bit at this hairball picture, you know that in different project types, there's only a relatively small number of patterns that you're repeating over and over and over again. It's not about unique works of art. It's about understanding those patterns and looking at ways to automate that kind of thing. It's the balance sheet approach instead of the profit and loss approach. Okay? Let me take an industrial revolution example here. This is the norm. Back when the kind of things started in the manufacturing world, you had skilled manual workers that manufactured things by hand and built custom works of art that were truly beautiful. And in our IT world, this is actually the majority of the way things happen, the way that hairball gets built. You have skilled IT specialists. They're good at what they do. But typically they're bringing the whatever tool or skills they have to the table, hand coding things, creating point-to-point custom integration solutions, and that's what ends up with that hairball. Well, in the 2000s, a lot of folks in the public sector and private sector began putting together centers of excellence around integration, around let's focus on doing this better. Let's make integration an engineering discipline rather than a hobby that happens as a byproduct of the application projects that always crop up. Well, this kind of moved us into the Henry Ford kind of world of the assembly line, all right, where we made some progress. Quality improved. Companies that embarked on these integration competency centers or centers of excellence around integration, they come by all sorts of different names. And not every organization obviously has something like this. Many, many don't. But most of these integration competency centers struggled to provide more than administrative or operations services for integration projects. In other words, they weren't actually involved in the projects themselves. Well, that was the whole point of the ICC team. But they had a hard time because they have to overcome all the politics, all the profit and loss orientation Armando talked about, have to overcome all that in order to get involved and cross those boundaries that are set up by the boxes in that hairball picture instead of the lines between the boxes. It's hard to overcome those political boundaries. But there were advantages, benefits. You took dedicated skilled labor, you standardized on a particular platform or set of tools, and so forth. Now, this is what the top echelon is doing today to do integration or get away from point to point or do everything, basically get ahead of the curve instead of be behind the curve, is they're taking a modern factory approach to integration. Now, what this means is, in a modern factory, you've got an automated flow of materials. Now, if I relate that to our world of data and integration, flow of materials is the code, you could say, that goes from requirements to analysis to design to implementation to test to deployment to continual change. That's your car that's going down the assembly line. It's the code. But then you've also got an automated flow of information. Well, that's, in effect, the information, the metadata around and how people, the business or IT are communicating together with each other to keep that flow of information tight, efficient, correct, and understood in the right way by both sides. And understood in the right way by both sides. I took a screenshot here because what I mean by that, a perfect example of this is the Dell, when I go to buy a laptop or a desktop, right? They've created a form for me. And I go out when I buy a desktop or laptop, I just specify, okay, here's the speed of processor I want, here's the memory amount, here's the options that I want, blah, 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 blah. I press go, and that sets the factory in motion, right? That sets the automated flow of materials in motion, and bam, out the other side comes a laptop or desktop. The point is, they've recognized the pattern, and they've automated the pattern. Now, every computer or laptop that comes off the line, this is not mass generation, this is mass customization, right? Every car that comes off the line, some have air conditioning, some don't. Some are green, some are red. Some have 2 doors, some have 4 doors. In other words, same thing with data integration. The data is different, but the patterns can be the same. I can be talking at a data integration kind of code level when I say this, when I talk about these patterns. I could also be talking at a much higher level about patterns, project patterns. When I do a data migration project, a data conversion project, a data warehouse project, a cloud project, a data retirement project, whatever that might be, these are all patterns too, right? They can also face the same kind of automation and so forth that benefit. So this is the next generation. This is what, as I go out and talk with public and private sector companies, this is what the top 5% are doing right now. This is not what everybody's doing, obviously, but this is how they're getting to address, taking this almost balance sheet approach, as Armando was talking about, rather than profit and loss approach, to getting ahead of the curve with that hairball rather than being run by it. Let me draw this picture another way. The majority of the world is doing what's kind of on the far left there. They're hand coding, right? They're taking a kind of ad hoc approach to integration, and they're creating that quick and dirty and very costly way of approaching an integration project. So that's, Armando mentioned that as well, that's costly in the long run. In the 90s, tools from TIBCO, WebMethods, IBM, Informatica, and so forth, middleware stuff came out, and that helped a little bit. It helped improve quality. Program management practices got better. In the 2000s, I talked about competency centers. That helped. And in the 2010, here, this is where we're talking about this next generation. This recognizing that we don't create unique works of art and custom point solutions, but we work towards this. Our folks should be working on these assembly lines and maintaining the assembly lines, not working on the custom works of art. Although sometimes, I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't places where custom works of art aren't necessary, right? Not everything can be built in this factory-oriented kind of way, but at least 80% of the stuff that we do can be. That's what we found. So what, in thinking about this and talking with companies, we found the perfect paradigm for marrying and talking about this kind of concept is what has been developed by Toyota since the 40s and talked about as lean. Taught in business school, sometimes people slam together Lean Six Sigma. I hate that because Six Sigma requires black belt and green belt training and all this other stuff. Nothing wrong with Six Sigma, but Lean, the beautiful thing about it is it's common sense. Common sense principles. Agile, software development. Armando also talked about Agile and Scrum, right? Those are practices that draw from Lean principles. But you can apply Lean principles also to a waterfall approach to a project. Doesn't matter. The whole key to it is, number one, focus on your customer. Who's your customer? Citizen, might be another department, might be another, whoever it might be. And eliminate waste from their perspective. Okay? Other thing, automate processes or mass customization, empower the team, build for change, build quality in, yada, yada, yada. I'll talk quickly about each of these. I won't be able to talk in very much detail. Let me make sure that I don't run over by talking about too many of these in too much depth. But here's another key, and this goes back to what Armando's saying again as well. Lean is not about eliminating resources, but about using them more efficiently. So when we say eliminating waste, when people go through and they create this more efficient assembly line, it's not about them laying off people. No. You're focusing folks on working differently, on working on the assembly lines rather than working on unique works of art. Here's another way of putting this generally accepting accounting principles, accounting view of the world. When they get a hold of lean, that can be a big problem. In the GAAP world of accounting, inventory is considered an asset. In the lean world of accounting, inventory is considered waste. That also goes back to what Armando was kind of speaking about with the balance sheet and profit and loss. Is another way of putting kind of what he was saying there. Armando, thank you, man. You really set this up. So anyway, one of the tools, one of the common sense tools, you don't need to buy anything here. You go up to the whiteboard, you get the right people in the room, you pick a product or service that your customers may be dissatisfied with you in how you are providing that to them. And you go through and create a business process flow, or what's called a value stream map, which is basically a quantified business process map, okay, where you're looking at queue depths, you're looking at how much time am I spending on doing this particular task, and at this square wave you see here, you're looking at whether the task and the time that I'm spending is considered by the customer to be value-add time or non-value-add time. Okay? Now here, the scenario I've chosen is something very, very, very simple. I'm going to add one simple column to a dimension table in a data warehouse, which means changing the ETL code a little bit, just to add a field, changing your data model, changing your BI tool a little bit to tweak it to expose that and turn that on. That's all it is. This is as simple as it gets, right? The average we found in talking with companies is about 12 weeks to get that into production. From the time it's asked for by the business or your customer, the citizen, whoever, to the time it actually gets put into production, 12 weeks. The amount of time where you're actually working on that the customer would pay for, that's value add, typically 1% or something very, very low. After you go through this and create this as-is value stream map, you then create a to-be value stream match, a future state value stream map. And here you find, okay, well, what could we be doing or should we be doing in the way that we're doing this? And you find all sorts of opportunities for eliminating waste. And most of these are not technological. They're people and process stuff. It's stuff that have to do with getting meetings set up, getting things approved, all the different roadblocks. Here's a real value stream map that we kind of consolidated a whole bunch of the talks that John Schmidt and I have had with companies over the past year. This is not a worst case scenario. This is a typical scenario for making a change to a data warehouse. Once again, 12 weeks, timelines across the top. You can't see this, I'm sorry, this is an eye chart. You're not really meant to be able to kind of read this. The whole point of it is how complex it is, right? Well, the process, what we're saying is the process is a hairball too, right? And that's created from that complexity that Armando was talking about, right? By doing things fast and cheap, that's what's created all these checks and balances, all this complexity, which adds all this cost and all this time to the project. So, by taking another look at that project, at how we're actually spending that time, putting that down on paper or on a big whiteboard, all right? Translating that into perhaps a Visio diagram or something, you can see what that future state needs to be. Now, if Future state can take a couple of years to get to, right? Doesn't happen. This is where continuous improvement comes in. It doesn't happen all at once. But it's good to know, you know, where are we headed? What would actually kind of solve these problems? The timeline across the top, by the way, shifted significantly. You can't see it from there because this is such an eye chart, as I mentioned. We went from 12 weeks down to 2 days to make that change. All right? You can't see that. And you see down at the bottom also the efficiency of how much time, value-add time versus non-value-add time, got much better. But the important thing is we're getting the solution to our customer better. And let me cut ahead, because I don't want to run out of time, and show kind of some of the things that, some of the ironies of of thinking this way. So I mentioned earlier about thinking in terms of assembly lines rather than unique works of art. One of the ways of doing that is, this is one of the best kept secrets at Informatica, actually. This is something that everybody has on their distribution. Anybody who's bought even the lowest cost Informatica thing gets this. It's a little template palette that goes into Visio and allows you to map out you as, hopefully you have, anybody have integration architects? Not just data architects or enterprise architects, but people who actually wear the hat of, I'm an integration architect and I look after the best practices of the way we do integration. Anybody? Very few. I was expecting that. It's new, all right? It's people thinking about those patterns. Looking at that hairball as, you know, really for a data warehouse project, there are only about a dozen different patterns, different types of mappings that I create that really cover everything. The data's different. I may have hundreds and hundreds of different mappings that are great, but really they all fall into about a dozen different classifications. So anyway, what we've given is a little tool here that allows you to create an assembly line. Effectively, create your own custom form or custom wizard for your developers to fill out. So what ends up happening is they get this form, like that Dell website page, and they fill in the different variables. You know, here's what my data actually is from the source side, and here's why I want it to go on the target side, and here's a little bit about the transformations and the special handling of certain things, where I want bad records to go, blah, 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 blah. And then they press a button, and that generates a mapping. Now, it's not done yet. The developer still needs to go in and finish making sure it's ready for production, test it, yada, yada, yada. The point is, it now follows the best practices, the bones of what that integration architect wanted everybody to be following. It's not giving everybody a blank white sheet of paper and allowing anarchy, okay, which is the typical way things work. It's giving them some structure, a form to fill out. This ends up generating, and actually thereby tying the design to the implementation as well. Beautiful. Love that. All right. So this takes us from the old school kind of way of building things to the new school, focusing on those assembly lines, those forms, and the building of those forms rather than the building the unique integration custom point-to-point things individually. Now here's the other thing. Private clouds are probably in government going to be more more of the discussion than public clouds, but here's a little software as a service thing that I'm just going to use to make a point. Informatica has literally, you go to informaticaondemand.com and log in, it'll download behind your firewall a little small power center, and this UI out there in the cloud will communicate behind your firewall to that power center, all right, and send messages back and forth. Right, and send messages back and forth. The UI that you have is simple enough for a business user to use. And you can set up for them blessed sources of data that they would like to publish and analyze, for instance, that they can then move over to put into a target area, perhaps, that you've set up for them as well, but you don't define the target for them. You don't actually have to do the work. You let them do the work. They've got this little wizard. Do I have my little, there we go. See there, the little wizard? We're on the 4th step right now where I'm mapping source fields to target fields, and here I've got some simple expressions, a little concatenation of 2 different first name, last name, or something like that. Anyway, I'm defining a mapping. The point here is that the business user can now run this mapping themselves, move the data themselves, and now begin, using statistical analysis on it, doing whatever they want to do with it. Here's the irony, and this goes back to what Armando was kind of getting at. Yes, the business is happy. They got self-service, right? Which sounds scary. Giving the business self-service, that's going to create even worse anarchy and a worse hairball than we have today. Aha! Here's the irony. Because everything that the business person was doing is being audited and logged in one place, I now have better oversight over what they're doing than I've ever had before. I can see who did it, when they did it, what they moved, how long it took to move it, where they put it, who's been looking at it. I know everything about it. Do you know that today? When you're asked to do that for them? Maybe not, because it's all over in SharePoint and all over everywhere and all these different documents and following whatever process that you've got. So you've got this seemingly contradictory dichotomy here of business self-service, which is great, but also better governance at the same time. Seemingly conflicting things. But you can actually get the best of both worlds with this new way of thinking. What we've got is an assembly line. This is an integration factory. A very simple one, but an integration factory nonetheless. All right. It's like taking that, in other words, you created that Dell website for them and given yourselves the best of both worlds. All right. Other concepts of lean developed, by the way, good. It's kind of ironic that Toyota been in the news for kind of negative things after 50, 60 years of development of the Toyota production system, and Deming, of course, who started over in Japan with them and then came over here with total quality management and so forth. But he started over there. He was famous over there far long before he ever came over to the United States. Point is, with lean, which has now been applied in the financial services area, hospitals, government, all different vertical sectors. It's not just for manufacturing. It has not just transformed lots of manufacturing companies. It's being used in all sorts of horizontal, vertical industries in different areas. One place it hasn't been applied very much at all is IT. All right. So one of the topics there, principles of Toyota, which, that's what I was going to say. Wall Street Journal article talked about Toyota. 1997, 1999, something like that. They decided they were going to become the #1 car manufacturer in the world within the next 10 years. 10 years later, what happened? Yeah, they stopped following their principles, right, in order to achieve that objective. Oops. So if you go back to 1999, where they had an awesome reputation and everybody was trying to follow them, you had a build quality in approach rather than a test quality in after the fact, which is the way we all normally work, right? Well, this is where getting the business and the IT involved sitting together with a common kind of UI appropriate for the business side and the IT side, literally looking at the same objects in the way that is technically appropriate or simplistically appropriate to each different audience, but they're looking at the same thing, developing, cleaning up, defining a common business language, doing all that stuff that needs to be done to create that, basically build quality into the data. Oops, that wasn't supposed to happen. There we go. Okay, so let me get to kind of my last big major point here, which is I made that claim early on about service-oriented architecture making things worse. Well, this is a kind of a picture. Along the top there, you've got your data consumers, your service consumers, right? Along the bottom, you've got the ugliness of your real physical systems, right? And in the middle, I'm going to put, you know, my ESB, my business services, my business process management layer, and so forth. And I'm going to build all these different services that connect up to this. Well, what have I done? I've now created a new hairball down there. I've pushed the problem down to a lower level and, in fact, really made things worse because now all that logic, all that business and transformation logic that integrates data, joins it up to some common definition, it's now in hand code. There's now no metadata to describe what those transformations and business definitions are. So your problem's worse. Okay? Plus, people approaching this, we're only looking at this from a message by message standpoint rather than, hey, sometimes I'm dealing with moving big sets of data. And sometimes I really want to clean and transform that data in more complex ways and federate data and do all sorts of, I mean, there are other things that I need to do there. Well, this is where creating a real data abstraction layer becomes important. And this is where what we've done, why we bought, for instance, Cyperion, a master data management company, and re-architected our product in version 9. This is kind of a little Informatica sales pitch here. But to create this ability, to create this data abstraction layer that will work with any ESB or any of the rest of your service-oriented architecture, but just concentrating on allowing you to manage that aspect of not creating that new hairball, right? Which means focusing on what Informatica does best, our core competency, which is data integration, data quality, data cleansing, and so forth, identity resolution, address, name and address cleansing, et cetera, data profiling, understanding the statistical problems with your data before, during, and after any project that you're working on. All that's built in here so that you can then create these logical data objects that then can be used by the rest of your service-oriented architecture or directly by your data consumers and channels up at the top there. So Informatica now, not just ETL for data warehousing, but providing this logical layer that allows you to solve this currently aforementioned problem. Hiding the ugliness of the data in your data sources there. How do I do continuous improvement? Well, in the factory world, they've got what we would refer to as metadata, describing everything that's going along on their factory floor. They've got visual management of where their bottlenecks are, where their costs are. And that's what we can provide as well with metadata. Let me go to, so we kind of finish here by focusing on the fact that there isn't one company or one government organization yet that's doing all 7 of these principles that I've referred to yet. But there are companies that are doing 1 or more of these at the present time and getting incredible returns on this. Because, in effect, what they're doing is they have changed their mindset from that P&L mentality that Armando was talking about to that balance sheet approach, looking for the patterns that they're repeating over and over again and automating those patterns rather than creating things as unique works of art all the time. So, this sounds like a boiling the ocean. It sounds any kind of cultural change is difficult. I understand that. Despite the fact that those principles are all very common sense, it can seem inundated, difficult to get started. So the way I always kind of just simplify it is, whoa, it's not really that hard getting started. Just first define who is your customer. Pick one. I know you got a lot of them. your life is incredibly complex, but let's pick one problem first. Who is the customer for that problem? What is the product or service that you provide for them that is not going very well? They really could be a lot happier with how quickly or how costly this problem is. And think about how you're going to measure their satisfaction or your improvement. I love this. I want to study this DSM thing too, because this plays into how you might optimize this stuff as well. Then draw your as-is business process or value stream map, like I showed earlier, and then your future state value stream map, and then go through the process of continually improving towards your to-be state. It's just that simple. Well, and then pick another customer, another product or service, once you've got that going, and then do the same thing, rinse and repeat, right? So that's steps to becoming lean. I make no money from the sales of these books, neither does John. This is just part of our kind of job description. And that's it. I hope you got something out of this. I'm only going to be here, I'm afraid, despite how wonderful this itinerary is. My wife is also traveling this week, so I have to return. So please catch me during this break up till about 11 or so, and because I'd love to answer questions and talk further with you. All right, thanks so much. Thanks, guys.